During a cold evening in December 1811, a recently constructed theater in the heart of the burgeoning capital of Richmond was hosting a series of plays. It was the day after Christmas, and the theater was late in opening up for the month as one of their lead actresses, Eliza Poe, the mother of future poet and writer Edgar Allan Poe, had passed away earlier in the month from consumption, otherwise known as tuberculosis. The plays for the evening would be held as a benefit for Alexander Placide and his daughter, Placide being a actor himself. The theater was packed with 598 audience members, 80 of whom were children. The first play went without any incident. However, during the following pantomime, a chandelier with lit flames ignited one of the props hanging from the ceiling, which rapidly grew in intensity within the following minutes, spreading across the rafters of the roof and falling down onto other flammable items. The crowd inside went into a panic and tried to flee the theater, which was rapidly being engulfed by the out-of-control blaze. People fled out of the exits. Some were trampled upon by the throng of people there, while still others took a bold gamble and jumped from the second-story window of the raging inferno that was the theater. Many people either never made it out or, in an attempt to save others, went back in only to die in the raging inferno. For instance, George William Smith, the recently elected governor of Virginia, was one such victim who, in an attempt to save his son, allegedly ran back into the burning building only to never come back alive. He was one of 72 victims consumed by the raging inferno. However, in this tragedy, there were a number of heroes, men who went out of their way to help save as many lives as possible that, without their help, may have never made it out. One of these men was Gilbert Hunt. Gilbert Hunt was born as a slave in 1780 in King William County, Virginia. He spent his childhood there until, at the age of 17, he was taken to Richmond, Virginia, where his master's daughter was married and relocated to the city. While there, he learned how to make carriages and after years of work was able to afford his own freedom. Decades after the fire, he recounted the night in an autobiography written by Philip Barrett and published in 1859. He begins with the following. It was the night after Christmas, 1811. I had just returned from workshop at the Baptist church and was about sitting down to my supper when I was startled by a cry that the theater was on fire. My wife's mistress called to me and begged me to hasten to the theater and, if possible, save her only daughter, a young lady who had been teaching me my book every night, and one whom I loved very much. The wind was very high, and the hissing and leaping flames soon spread over the whole building. The house was built of wood, and consequently the work of destruction very short. When I reached the building, I immediately went to the house of a colored fiddler named Gilliant, who lived close by, and begged him to lend me a bed on which the poor frightened creatures might fall as they leaped from the windows. This he positively refused to do. I then got a stepladder and placed it against the walls of the burning building. The door was too small to let the crowd, pushed forward by the scorching flames, to get out, and numbers of them were madly leaping from the windows only to be crushed to death by the fall. I looked up and saw Dr. James McCall, standing near one of the top windows and calling to me to catch the ladies as he handed them down. I was then young and strong, and the ladies felt as light as feathers. By this means we got all the ladies out of this portion of the house. The flames, by this time, were rapidly approaching the doctor, and beginning to take hold of his clothing, and, oh me, I thought that good man who had saved so many souls was going to be burned up. He jumped from one of the windows, and when he touched the ground, I thought he was dead. He could not move an inch. No one was near him, for the wall above was tottering like a drunken man, ready at any moment to fall and crush him to death. I heard him scream out, "Will nobody save me?" And at this risk to my own life, I rushed to him and bore him away to a place of safety. The scene surpassed anything I ever saw. The wind's shrieks of hopeless agony, the piercing cry, Lord, save, or I perish. The uplifted hands, the earnest prayers of mercy, for pardon, for salvation. I think I see it now. All just as it happened. That evening, he would end up saving the lives of a dozen people from the raging inferno, which, in spite of his efforts and the efforts of Dr. James McCall, would claim the lives of over 70 people. Hunt would eventually return to the scene of the fire and speculate on the fate of the mistress's daughter, recounting the following. The next day, I went to the scene where such awful sights had been witnessed, and oh, how my heart shudders even now at the things which then and there met my eye. There lay, piled together, one mass of half-burned bodies, the bodies of all classes and conditions of people, the young and the old, the bond and the free, the rich and the poor, the great and the small, were all lying there together. Some of them were so badly burned that it was almost impossible to recognize them. Others were almost uninjured, yet life had left their bodies, and there they lay, cold and stiff and dead. I never found my young mistress, and suppose she perished among the many other young and beautiful females, who on that dreadful night passed so unexpectedly from time to eternity. He concluded this tearful account with this final, heart-wrenching remark. I thought, after this, there would not be any more theaters. Gilbert Hunt's actions that day helped save the lives of a dozen people, including Dr. James McCall's own life. And yet he would live with the trauma of that terrible day in his mind, the recounting of the memory of that night in this interview still bringing the then 79-year-old man to tears. Mr. Hunt would live on for another 4 years, passing away at the ripe old age of 83 years old on April 26, 1863. His remains would be laid to rest in the Union Mechanics Burial Ground in Barton Heights on the northern side of Shaco Creek in the Shaco Valley. Unfortunately, since the time of his burial and today, his final resting place has been lost to time as well as his headstone. The reason why this has happened stems from a common problem with the lesser-known cemeteries of Richmond: neglect. The Union Mechanics Burial Ground, along with the 5 other adjacent burial grounds, would be reorganized by the City of Richmond into Barton Heights cemeteries. Though the city owns the cemetery, much as we saw with Oakwood Cemetery and its historic sections, Barton Heights was subjected to decades of neglect. This has resulted in many of the headstones toppling over, either due to inclement weather, vandalism, subsidence, or erosion of the topsoil, and being buried underneath a thin layer of topsoil. A similar fate likely befell Hunt's headstone sometime during this period of neglect, resulting in the location being lost. However, if the headstone still exists, it's likely that it may be recovered in the near future. There is hope for Barton Heights, as volunteers as well as local universities have taken up the interest in locating and uncovering the toppled over headstones. In a similar situation to the preservation efforts conducted by the Sons of Confederate Veterans for Oakwood Cemetery's Confederate section, there is a strong underlying support for the recovery and potential future restoration of Barton Heights. This is an endeavor I support, an endeavor that I hope and pray will, one day, lead to the recovery of Gilbert Hunt's headstone and allow for those who wish to honor his heroism that terrible day to finally be able to do so. May God bless Gilbert Hunt. May God bless all of you.